Good afternoon, those of you in the audience and those of you watching on YouTube. I'm Dr. Kelly Rivers, and I am here to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Jen Horn. Her presentation is headlining and pretty much driving our Bard at Blount theme for this year in 2023, all about celebrating the 400 years of the First Folio. Her presentation is How the First Folio Changed the World. Our second presentation that was scheduled for today about Shakespeare's words has been rescheduled for tomorrow. So those of you who are watching for extra credit for my class, yes, that means you could actually get 3 extra credit opportunities tomorrow. So today is just all about Dr. Horn, and those of you who are not live in the auditorium with us, you are missing out on some free swag, as well as some really cool props. But I will turn it over now to Dr. Horn, who will educate us and tell us everything we probably didn't know we needed to know about the First Folio. And for our live stream viewers, if you do have any questions at any time during the presentation, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring that chat, and at the end, we will have time for questions. Okay? Dr. Horn.
Welcome. Thanks to the people who showed up in person. Thanks to the people who are watching on YouTube. So glad you came out. Bard at Blount is a program that Dr. Rivers and I started with Professor Amanda Carr-Wilcoxon in 2015. And we were going for 4 years in a row, and we're set to be the 5th. And then just like in Shakespeare's time, the plague came. So just like Shakespeare, we're getting it back together after that. So thank you for showing up. And really, before I even click a single slide, I do want to be clear, we call our event Bard at Blount. So my question to the people who are here in person, or if you're on YouTube, feel free to put it in the chat. Who are we referring to when we talk about the Bard? Shakespeare, absolutely. So that is why we are here today, and that is what the First Folio is all about. If you can see the slide, we've got Shakespeare's picture. In fact, this is the only one that we know for sure looks like Shakespeare because his friends had it commissioned in his lifetime about 7 years after he died. The rest of them we can guess at, but this is the one that we know for sure. So now you know who the Bard is, you know why you're here, but what is a First Folio? Had someone actually asked me here before we got started, you are going to go over what on earth a First Folio is, aren't you? No, I assume that you know everything already. How dare you show up to a lecture at a community college not knowing everything in the world about Shakespeare? No. Basically, first of all, with the First Folio, you need to know what a folio is. And this comes from the old printing, where you had a printing press with a really large piece of paper. And a folio is where you fold the paper once. And in fact, let's see, I brought a lovely, of course, Shakespeare-related piece of paper. And so folio, fold it once. You now have 4 pages. Oh, folio. 1, 2, 3, 4. So even though you folded it once, you have 4 pages. Quarto is if you folded it again, okay, I don't think this one's going to go with me, but it becomes half the size. And then an octavo, you fold it again, and it becomes half the size again. So folio has 4 pages for every 1 big page you print. Quarto has, math people? No, folio has 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you fold it again, you're going to double it. So how many does a quarto have? 8. You didn't know you were getting math. We really are interdisciplinary. And then an octavo, you fold it again, you get how many? So that's a lot of pages to set. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about setting those pages. But it also gives you an idea of the size of these books. And so here, here you go. Here are a couple of, you've got a folio on the side, then you've got a quarto and an octavo with it, and you've got a person holding up a copy of the First Folio. we looked at different sizes, and this side, provided by Kelly Rivers and one of her former students, shows you the size of one page of a folio. So imagine two of these together. The closest book I could find, Shakespeare related again, is going to be about that big. This is not an easy to carry around book, right? This is a big old book, and especially because this is that small, Shakespeare's first folio is a lot thicker. So this is not a book size that you do very often. This is something that you do occasionally for the really important books. And before Shakespeare, this was usually for Bibles. This was for philosophical treatises that were important and literally as well as figuratively weighty. So this was a big deal to do plays in this time period because, after all, in Shakespeare's time, a long run of a play would be 6 performances. Think about this like, if you're old enough, TV before VCRs, and where you might occasionally get reruns, but not all the time. So you have to show up when it's on. And so it was thought of as more disposable. You didn't necessarily publish plays. In fact, Shakespeare didn't personally publish any of his plays in his lifetime. Members of his theater company did, but he didn't, whereas he published poems that he thought were the important bits. And they are in much smaller volumes than this. So this was a big deal. Now, when we come to the first folio, that is the first edition of Shakespeare's collected works printed together. So it is the first. 3 others followed, second, third, and fourth folios. I know they were so clever in coming up with titles, but the one that we still talk about today, and we'll talk about all the reasons for that, is the first. So again, you get the picture of him from his lifetime. It also is slightly controversial. It was done by a young engraver, and people get really annoyed because his head size doesn't really seem to match his body. And in fact, they improved the print as they printed new copies. And so in some, it seems like his collar and his head are levitating above his body, and in others, they match better. So we're going to talk about differences in different copies, and while that's up on the screen, I want you to be thinking about that. Now, like I said, before Shakespeare, you didn't think about plays in a folio until this guy. So one of Shakespeare's good friends, there are stories that perhaps he died because he had gone out drinking with Ben Jonson and another friend, and he just never recovered. I don't think that one's true. We got that from like people who knew his grandchildren. So I don't think we can go with that, but it gives you an idea that they actually were friends, they knew each other, and in the same year that Shakespeare died, Ben Jonson published his collected works, everything. He was well known as a poet as well as a dramatist, so no one was surprised that he included his poems, but they were surprised that he included his plays, and it was the first time anyone had done that. So this is a ballsy move by Ben Jonson, and he was really lucky it sold. And because it sold, Shakespeare's friends, Hemming and Condell, were really, well, they were impressed. They thought, well, maybe we could do this for our friend William. He had died in 1616. This is published in 1623, although it was in the works for several years before that. We know he was close friends with both of these men because in his will, he left money to both of them for memorial rings so that they would remember him. They also were actors in the same troupe. They would have been around when these plays were performed, and they would probably have been acting in them. So you can see in one of the many pages at the beginning of the folio, they have a preface to it, and they sign it, Hemming and Condell. So we do know they are the two people to either praise or blame, depending on whether or not you like studying Shakespeare. So, and If you're at all interested in the really weird history of how this came to be in print, come back tomorrow to hear Will Buck talk about this, because it really is a case of truth is stranger than fiction, and I heartily recommend it. So, we have our lovely table of contents, and with this, I want you to note we have 36 plays by William Shakespeare. Anyone quickly, maybe on YouTube, pausing this and saying, oh, there's something wrong with that? Anyone speed counting? We only have 35 titles listed because with all of that mess about the publishing, they're still trying to get one more title, but it wasn't locked down. They didn't know if they could include it. So Troilus and Cressida is not on this list. But before they were done printing, they were able to get it. So it is in the book. Now, again, we have 36 plays in this book. Only about 19 plays had been printed in Shakespeare's time. Not all of those with at least, obviously Shakespeare hadn't printed it himself, but some of these were not even authorized by his company, the Globe Theatre, the King's Men, who held the rights to it. We also had some people who blatantly would just, well, they might steal a prompt book and write everything down. They also, and see if this sounds like something that might possibly happen today, would have somebody stand in the theater and, well, they didn't have cameras back then, but somebody with a really good memory, listen for all of it, maybe photographic memory, and then write everything down as soon as he came out, so that you have something that's not quite right, but it's close enough. This is also like the things that you get that with almost the same name as the big budget movie that's not quite right. So that's what we had a lot of in Shakespeare's lifetime. So without this book, the first folio, we wouldn't have 18 of Shakespeare's plays. And you think, oh, we'd still have 19 others, who cares? But here are some of the plays that we would not have without this book. We wouldn't have As You Like It, All the World's a Stage and the Men and Women Merely Players. We wouldn't have Julius Caesar, Friends, Romans, Countrymen, Lend Me Your Ears. Macbeth? Okay, you have to say it with me. What is the great witch's line? Double, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. So we wouldn't have that. Though I have to pause for the sake of academics, because this one breaks my heart. Shakespeare did not write all of his plays on his own. He had collaborators, and most critics now agree that he was working with John Fletcher on that one, and he didn't write those particular lines that I dearly love. I'm sorry if I just burst all of your bubbles. I'm so sorry. It hurts my heart too, but still a great play and so many other great lines. Taming of the Shrew, I really love that one. That's what my PhD is in. The Tempest, where such stuff as dreams are made on, and now thanks to Maltese Falcon, we say dreams are made of, but Shakespeare went with on. And Twelfth Night, and I mean, that's only 6 of the 18. We also wouldn't have had any of these other plays. No other copies earlier than this survive. We wouldn't have them. So that is a huge, huge loss. So when I talk about the importance of the first folio of this particular book, it's pretty important. And yes, if you don't like Shakespeare and you were forced to read it in high school, you can hate this book that much. I will allow it. So we also have some versions that are substantially different. The first one is Hamlet, the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. It had 2 quartos before. I personally love the fact that the first one that was published is known as the bad quarto, because it really is one of those memorial reconstructions that sounds almost right. And I've been lucky enough to see a full production of it, and it's great. I really heartily recommend it. I'm still trying to get Knoxville Shakespeare to do a reading out loud of it. So we've got that. The folio version has a lot of the same things as the second quarto, but it also has brand new lines that we wouldn't have otherwise. And the same goes for King Lear. Both of them have versions in King Lear that the other one doesn't have. So you need to look at them together and apart because each one is edited to have slightly different themes to it. One, you get more outside views and like servants gossiping, and the other, who cares about those little servants? So it is quite interesting to have this folio copy. And of course, even with those, there are some things that are missing. So first and foremost with this, Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Raise your hand if this is your favorite play ever. Raise your hand if you've actually seen, oh, I shouldn't raise my hand on that one, but raise your hand if you've actually seen Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Yeah, there aren't that many productions. That said, there's some really interesting things about migration and immigration. So you get a few more performances now than you used to, but that one didn't come along until the third folio. Two Noble Kinsmen showed up a little bit later. Edward III, they didn't even decide that that was Shakespeare until the 1980s. We live in an amazing place. Cardenio, sad story. They actually had a manuscript copy of Cardenio. They decided not this version, they didn't have it for this, but years later, another person had a copy, and they decided, and again, how modern is this? They weren't going to publish it. They'd publish a modern adaptation of it that people would like better, and then later on they could put out a copy and really make some money. Problem is they never put out the copy later on, and it went up in a fire at Covent Garden Theatre. Alas. We also get the play Love's Labour's Won that is very controversial. It's supposed to be the sequel to Love's Labour's Lost. No one's ever found it. There's an entry in the Stationer's Register saying it should be there. No one's found it. I would argue it's probably much ado about nothing, where they're coming back from a war and people who had flirted beforehand now get together. In fact, Royal Shakespeare Company agrees with me because they put on a production of Much Ado About Nothing along with Love's Labour's Lost and called it Love's Labour's Won. Those are the only things that are missing from this book. Everything else that we have from Shakespeare, we have in here, except for the poems that he published himself during his lifetime, but all the plays right here. So here is a lovely, lovely copy that, of course, is in perfect condition 400 years later. I mean, how many books are going to look mint in box after 400 years? But we'll talk a little bit more later about this particular edition. What I want to mention, though, while it's on here is, even if it doesn't look great, this is a book where scholars still want to see every single copy of the book. Now, I don't think there would be any purpose to that now where they're printing from a digital copy. However, we have a very different circumstance back then. So, lovely image from the printing house. You can see the wide paper that they're printing on that's going to create 2 pages on one side, 2 pages on the other side. And for each of these pages, they have to take teeny tiny little metal blocks and put them all in the right order. If you think it is annoying typing an essay, imagine getting all of these teeny tiny little blocks, putting them right side up in here as fast as possible because your boss is breathing down your neck because you need to get it done and start doing this. Anyone think that they might possibly make a typo or two on this? Yeah. And they did. We have different compositors who were doing this who were better than others. There's one that always gets a bad rep because he was so bad at it. That said, I just think how bad I would be at this. But you do this, you put the ink on it. You see rolling ink on there. And again, it's for that many letters on a page. And this is the first time that they print it. They don't know how many words are going to fit on the page, so they have to guess. Sometimes you have to add like a couple of words in the margins at the very bottom. So it becomes kind of interesting there. But with this, what happens is after you print one or two, you have the bosses in the background reading through, editing, spell checking, and when they realize that there's an error, you go back in and fix it. So you may have two that are completely wrong, then you might have three that are slightly better, you find another typo, you fix it. So there may be more than 50 different versions of this set of pages. So scholars always want to go around, see all the different versions to see what Shakespeare might have meant. So with this, we have a collection of folios, and what I love about this is you can see all of these are different sizes and shapes. All of these are the exact same with those allowances, material inside. But because you get to decide how you bound your book, because if you are frou-frou enough to spend a lot of money to buy this, you probably want to have it match the rest of your library and look beautiful, yes? Obviously. So you take it to your favorite bookbinder and they do it and they decide how much they want to cut off on the edges. But then later on, maybe the binding is looking a little bit bad. I mean, it's been 400 years. So each time you have it rebound, you have to cut off a little bit more. And so after a while, the book gets smaller and smaller. So again, you see all of these different sizes, and it is really fascinating. All of these belong to the Folger, as do all of these. And I love that some of them are much thicker than others. Some may be bound in multiple volumes. So, as I said before, all of this, one big book. One big book. And of course, that's not going to be that convenient after a while. I mean, do you really want to take something this big and probably 2 or 3 times as thick with you all the time to read? No? I mean, maybe if you need to develop your arm muscles, which people really cared about in those days. Otherwise, the idea of having volume Shakespeare becomes a good idea, and more importantly with this, and this is the edition by Nicholas Rowe, this thing called copyright was coming in. And so we want to publish it so that we get to keep the copyright, yes? So that we get the money. And so it starts with this version by Nicholas Rowe, and then after a certain number of years, you have to do it again. And here you get Alexander Pope, one of the great scholars and critics of the age, putting out his version that ends up being really bad. He collected all of the greatest versions that he could find, and then he didn't bother to read them. And he absolutely got called out on it by Louis Theobald. Sadly, we don't think about him as much. He's not quite as much of a, well, I don't think Alexander Pope is a household name, but even in literary circles, Louis Theobald doesn't get the thoughts he deserves. But here is the thing that I love about these two men, and more importantly, their publishers. They decided that this was going to be where they made their stand, because publishers for Pope wanted to keep that copyright. Publishers for Theobald wanted to get it. And so they decided they were going to keep on cranking out these copies, and they started doing play-by-play editions. So now, rather than having to carry this around, you get to carry this around, much better, and they flooded the market. You get Theobald's publishers saying, oh, we'll deliver them to you wherever you are, which people did not do outside of London. Oh no, you came to their shop. So with this, just to keep the first folio's copyright alive, you get so many copies out there. So Shakespeare goes from being a playwright that people think he wrote good stories to the one who is everywhere. Everywhere, everywhere. And this continues with Samuel Johnson's edition and his best friend, David Garrick, who becomes the leading actor of the age, playing in Shakespeare plays. And, well, if you think that I in my willpower shirt with all of the merch that I have, and for people on YouTube, I've got some merch around the podium too. I have not drank the Kool-Aid like David Garrick drank the Kool-Aid. He had his own temple on the banks of the Thames to the glory of Shakespeare. And he also welcomed people to Stratford-upon-Avon for the Shakespeare Jubilee. This was the first time that people were told to go on a pilgrimage to Shakespeare's hometown so that they could understand the genius of this man. What I really love is, so this is the beginning of what is now known as the cult of Shakespeare. So with this, David Garrick donates this lovely statue, which has actually been in the news relatively recently because they redid all of this. And it's now beautiful. It's all completely white. So he did this as a start and got people to come in. I love this Victorian postcard of Shakespeare's birthplace, people touring there. But Garrick, he also, and keep in mind, this is 1767, so the Victorian postcard is a little bit later. He got in on the merch. My personal favorite, and this is actual merch from the Shakespeare Jubilee, has a picture of the statue over here, and it is a tankard. So buy a beer, get a tankard to take home with Shakespeare. So, yeah. And so much was made with the wood from what was known as Shakespeare's mulberry tree that he had in his backyard, and especially toothpicks. People claim to have toothpicks from that. So much was made that they claimed that you could have built the entire British fleet with that much wood. And this is a current statue in New Place, Shakespeare's house, commemorating that mulberry tree. So from there, from that cult, we get this modern obsession with Shakespeare. Are there many people who you can see kind of an emoji of, and you immediately know who that historical figure is? I would argue it's a fairly short list. And 400 years later, that's pretty good. This was a basic Google image search, and it came up with that variety, all of which are kind of identifiable. There are a few that I might have to stare at a little bit. But especially if you get the big collar, you know it's him. So someone that we know that well now. And not only that, we use his words all of the time. For the people who are here, I have a copy of this poster over on the side. Feel free to take a look at it later on. And please come back for Amy Wombles tomorrow to talk about all of Shakespeare's words and phrases that we have because of him. I mean, this is a person who has 1,700 words added to the Oxford English Dictionary, where he was the first one to use it. He may or may not have come up with it himself, but he was the first one to write that down, gosh darn it, so he gets credit. So, good reminder, get a word started, and if you keep it going long enough that it gets an Oxford English Dictionary, you've won. So, we've got all of those words. We also have some pretty great movies. I'm a big fan of 10 Things I Hate About You, which is Tammy the Shrew, one of those plays that we wouldn't have if it weren't for the first folio. You also get all of these pop culture references to Romeo and Juliet, like Taylor Swift's Love Story. And I'm sorry, double, double toil and trouble is the gift that keeps on giving. I love this clip from Prisoner of Azkaban. You also get another line from the same play, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And possibly my favorite offshoot of all of Shakespeare, The Lion King. We would not have The Lion King without Shakespeare. If you don't like Shakespeare, remember that. Okay, so again, all of this comes from that one book. And if you think all of that is too light and frivolous, then I offer you this copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. Is anyone who in here familiar with what this copy is, who it belonged to? I didn't know about this. I've really enjoyed learning about this. This This belonged to a guy in South Africa. This was Nelson Mandela's personal copy while he was a prisoner in Robben Island. It was smuggled into him, and we have his personal notes from it. He has talked about how much, when he was feeling frustrated, how much it helped him. So it is possible for a book like this to change the world. By the way, I love the fact that this particular book has become such an artifact. It has toured the world. It has been the center of several expositions where you have major people coming to see it, and it is the thing people come to. Shakespeare, complete works. So, all of this, you can tell a direct line from the first folio to those early editions with multi-volume sets and the publishing copyright battles to get, that also made the first folio no longer interesting, because you want the new edition, right? Who cares about that old edition? And I love that the famous Oxford Bodleian Library, which is famous for being like one of the best scholarly libraries in the entire world, they sold theirs when they got the third folio, because who needs that? They later on rebought it for a lot more money. But that led to Garrick's mania. Here is a copy of John Bell's Shakespeare from Garrick's time. And that inspired people to be obsessed with Shakespeare. And the example I have for this is actually using brand new technology. This is a copy of the first facsimile of the first folio. So as soon as cameras got good enough that you could take pictures and reproduce them of books, Shakespeare was at the forefront of all of that. And because of one copy of this, I think maybe even the second or third edition of it, you get a guy named Henry Folger interested in the folios. And that one copy that he actually gave to his wife as a gift led him to start collecting first folios when people knew, I mean, they're impressive, but they didn't really think of it as the first folio that much. Enough that there was a facsimile, but not the way we think of it today. And so, of course, him buying up lots and lots, and come back and see Professor Carl Wilcoxon tomorrow talk about this, because he went a little overboard. I think that's fair to say. And if you've ever been to the Shakespeare Folger Library in Washington, D.C., you can see his collection. But that leads us back to the folios and this interest in them. So I want to go from there to where we are now with the folios. And that is, they're worth a lot of money. This one, $2.4 million. And as impressive as that sounds, that's not a very good version. This is one that has pages cut out. It has pages missing. Other things have been replaced with later copies. So this isn't even a good one. It's $2.4 million. A more recent version set a record for the most expensive book of literature, not Bible literature, ever auctioned. And I think that was in 2022. Sorry, tiny font on here. I apologize if it's the wrong year. But recently, so this is still going along. There aren't that many in private hands. Most have gone to institutions, to libraries. But there's still a few, and here is my favorite part. You still find some every once in a while. This is one that was found in, sorry, I can't remember if this is 2014 or 2016. One was found in 2014. There were two that were found in 2016. This is my favorite story, though. This is from a public library in France. It had acquired books from a monastery that had a really incredible library, was known for academic work, but this was on a shelf somewhere, and they didn't think it was like a first folio, so people were ignoring it, and then finally they realized, oh, this is important. And so it made a lot of money with this. You also get another one that was found on a stately home in Scotland, an island in Scotland, cut into 3 separate volumes. So no one looked at it twice because, I mean, it's 3 volumes. So yeah, I think they were happy with the price they got for that too. So if you are interested by any or all of this, I really love this website that has been commissioned for this particular year, the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's Folio. It is Folio 400, easy to Google, and it has everything you could possibly imagine. You can see a list of where to go for different copies of the folio if you want to become a folio scholar. You can also see about the history, things that none of our speakers have time to get into because there's a lot of fascinating material here. And you can see it all for free here. They've gotten a number of literary scholars to write pieces for it, and there is also a really amazing list of 50 facts about the first folio. For the people in here, I've got a copy over here that I love, but it's listed in with those other experts. You can look down at the titles for that. So I heartily recommend this. And most importantly, you can see where you can see a Shakespeare production, because after all, we wouldn't have a lot of those without this book. So at this point, I want to thank you guys for coming and see if anybody has questions. I mean, there's so much left to talk about, right? I know, there's a lot. Questions?
What did you say your favorite Shakespeare play was?
I really love Taming of the Shrew because it can be read in such completely different ways depending on how you're looking at it. You could think of it as, oh, this is the tragedy of a woman getting beaten down, or it's a celebration of a woman talking back and manipulating the people around her. I really appreciate Shakespeare is adaptable. And if it wasn't adaptable, we wouldn't be talking about 400 years later. That said, I really love A Midsummer Night's Dream. I will never get tired of seeing that play because it is so silly. So, so silly. Anything else? So, then I will remind people, tomorrow we now have 3 speakers, and again, if you were late tuning in, our second speaker today unfortunately couldn't make it, but is planning to be here tomorrow, Amy Womble. She's going to talk about Shakespeare's words and what they have added to our language. We have Will Buck here in the audience today talking about the messy history of getting all of this published. And we have Professor Carl Wilcoxon talking about Henry Folger and his collection of first folios. So please come back and see us then. Question?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, for his friends to publish this after he was dead, how did it, like, they have to get the right to do that, or?
Oh, yes. The short answer is yes, and this is part of what Will is going to be talking about tomorrow. So I will do a small answer, is that fair? And then you can learn more. Just know, whoever was the first to publish a play got the rights. So if it was somebody who had someone stand in the middle of the theater and listen, and it was absolutely rubbish, they still have the rights. And so they had to negotiate with all of the people who held various rights to Shakespeare's plays. And that was a lot of deals to make happen. So we think it took a while to come together. And then again, like Troilus and Cressida wasn't even a done deal when they've started printing this. And they were printing other things during the course of printing the folio. They think it took, I don't know, maybe a year to print all of these things. They did it in batches. So fascinating things, but no, it was tricky. Because they were members of the Globe Theater, they were part owners of the Globe Theater, they were able to get some things that the Globe held the rights to. And I should say the Kingsmen played in the Globe Theater. But they had some of the rights, but they did deals.
But Shakespeare or his family did not
Nope.
have any right.
Nope. He sold them to the Globe, And he was, of course, he was one of the owners of the Globe. They had a company where you could buy a share in the ownership. So he had gotten paid during his lifetime. He got paid pretty well. He actually came back, bought the biggest, either biggest or second biggest house in town, but a big old ostentatious house in the middle of town that later on someone else owned. Got so tired of tourists coming by looking in the windows that he actually just ended up like burning it all down one night because he couldn't take it anymore. Yeah, so that's why if you go today, you have the building next door, and then they have done some really interesting things with the footprint of the original building, where New Place, the name of the house, stood. And they did full archaeological excavations with that. So there have been some interesting stories that came out in the last 20 years about what was found there. And also one of these years, I have to bring it in, I donated money for New Place, and as a result, I got, and it came with a certificate, completely suspiciously shipped separately from this, a vial of earth from the layer, Shakespeare's layer of dirt at New Place. So I think maybe we need to talk to Dr. Milne about getting that. Ooh, and have Mr. Askey help with that too. So yeah, I think there might be some interesting things there. But no, as far as I know, his family did not get anything from the actual first folio. They were out of it. They were back in Stratford. Other questions?
I'm curious, how old was he when they started drilling into his clothes?
Ooh, good question. Okay, so Shakespeare's years, 1564 to 1616. He died when he was 52. He actually was already retired and went back to the country to enjoy his big house by then. So we have early plays really in like 1590 to 1592. He's making his name. In 1599, 1600, you get the big hits like Hamlet and Midsummer Night's Dream. So late 30s when he's a big deal, and retired just before 50. Other questions? Well, thank you guys for coming out. Thank you guys for tuning in. And again, I hope to see you all tomorrow in person or virtually for these other looks from a wide variety of angles at Shakespeare's First Folio. Thanks for coming to Bard at Blount.